Ancient ruins. NASA's Operation Icebridge in Antarctica involved monitoring changes to polar ice. They use a new system called the Advanced Topographic Laser Altimeter System, or ATLAS for short. This technology is capable of looking underneath the ice to see what's hiding on the ground below. It uses photons to impact the Earth and make a perfect map of what's underneath solid ice. After scanning Antarctica, scientists discovered something that appeared to be a mysterious city. Something man-made that's been hidden for thousands of years. The patterns in the photographs clearly show some kind of artificial construction. There even appears to be a pyramid structure hiding beneath the ice. Now, these could all be geological formations found in nature, but to some people, it doesn't really look like it. There are too many straight lines and too many clusters of rectangular shapes that appear to be houses. Plus, it's all under about a mile of solid ice. The only way settlement could have been built under Antarctica is if it happened hundreds of thousands of years ago, when the continent was still a lush forest. For conspiracy theorists, the implications of all this are clearly quite frightening from a historical standpoint. If there truly is a settlement buried under the ice here, it means there was a civilization that predates humanity living on the continent. It could mean the only reason their settlement remained in Antarctica is because of that mile of thick ice preserving it, while all other traces of this mysterious culture vanished. What do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments below. Mysterious ice ship. In a shocking discovery from Antarctica, what appears to be a huge ship locked in an iceberg has been spotted in satellite images. The ship appears to be about 400 feet long, totally encased in ice 100 miles from the coast. Authorities don't yet know exactly where the ship came from or how it became trapped in ice, as there are no records of a ship this size going missing near Antarctica. The vessel is a total mystery, and all we can really do is guess at what happened here. The biggest clue is that the ship looks like a cruise liner. It also appears to be completely on its side. You can even see the rows of windows from the cabins all along the hull and the smokestacks on the top of the boat. One of the wilder theories is that the boat stuck in the iceberg was from a lost Nazi base built in Antarctica nearly a century ago. More realistically, this was a ghost ship that was abandoned at sea and floated down to Antarctica. Then it tipped over, froze, and became one with a huge sheet of ice. While that is one possibility, it's also potentially just one big hunk of ice that looks remarkably like a giant ship. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. The Antarctic fossil rainforest. The frigid continent of Antarctica was once just as hot as Italy is today. We know this because of a fossil rainforest discovered in Antarctica. These days, the average temperature at the South Pole is 78 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. 90 million years before today, the temperature could soar to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a difference of almost 200 degrees. According to marine geologist Johann P. Klages, one of the scientists responsible for unearthing the fossils in Antarctica, 90 million years ago was the last time the continent was completely covered with vegetation. He also says Antarctica was probably home to a rich biodiversity of animal life, including dinosaurs. The fossils Johann and his team discovered weren't actually found on the continent, but at the bottom of the sea floor back in 2017. They found fossilized tree roots that date to the Cretaceous period. And not that long ago, a research team from Brazil uncovered pieces of charcoal dating back 75 million years. The charcoal almost definitely came from an ancient fire that engulfed the rainforest in Antarctica. What this means is that something major happened that caused Antarctica to basically burst into flame. And according to these scientists, the climate can and almost certainly will shift again sometime in the future, so that Antarctica is once more as hot and as tropical as the Amazon rainforest. Hyena teeth. A pair of fossilized teeth were discovered in Canada's Yukon Territory in the Old Crow Basin back in the 1970s. The teeth were pulled from an area once entirely covered by ice, along with 50,000 other mammal fossils that have been collected over the past century. Because the basin was frozen for so long, all these fossils remained amazingly preserved. And although the actual bodies of the hyenas weren't found, their teeth have been enough for scientists to learn what they were doing in North America. Even though the teeth were found in the 1970s, it wasn't until quite recently that researchers from the University of Buffalo identified them. The teeth had been kept in the Canadian Museum of Nature, collecting dust in a back room. But thanks to scientists taking a renewed interest in them, the teeth have now been analyzed. Researchers identified the teeth as belonging to the Chasmaporthetes genus, more formally known as running hyenas. They differ from modern hyenas because they had extremely long legs that made them much quicker than their relatives in Africa. Another interesting point is that researchers have never found evidence of hyenas in the Arctic region of Canada before. Their fossils have only been found in Africa, Eurasia, and the southern parts of North America. We now know that during the Ice Age, when sea levels were much lower than today, gangs of hyenas roamed all the way from their ancestral home in Asia to the northernmost territories in North America. They took the same route that humans did 15,000 years ago, only about 1.4 million years before we made the trek. The Lagarflot. In the year 1345, a mystery began in the lake town of Egilsstadir in Iceland. Locals witnessed a monster in the waters of Lake Lagarflot. They described this monster as a gigantic sea serpent, and it became known as the Lagarflot serpent. It was recorded in medieval scripts in 1589 that the monster was said to have raised its body so high above the water that a ship could have passed underneath. It appeared once again in the 17th century in Icelandic chronicles. The monster was witnessed between 1749 and 1750, discussed in the media in the 20th and 21st century, and even recorded on video in 2012. The mysterious lake worm has been witnessed repeatedly for about 700 years. People have described it as a gigantic worm slithering through the lake. Some have called it a gigantic water slug, and nobody has any idea what in the world it actually is. We know that the lake itself is fed by glacial waters. It's a massive body of water that's below sea level, and the worm is supposedly about 40 feet long. It's even been seen outside the water, coiled like a serpent in the shade of some trees. This thing is basically the Loch Ness monster of Iceland, and with just as many sightings. In 1963, the head of the Icelandic National Forest Service claimed to see the beast, and it was witnessed again in 1998 by a teacher and her entire class of students. In 1983, contractors laying a telephone cable found that their equipment had been broken by an unidentified creature, and some claim it was the giant serpent. Giant horror birds. Fossils recovered in Antarctica show some of the most horrific birds that ever soared the skies. The bone specimens found on the icy continent represent the oldest member of a particular giant extinct bird species called Pelagornithid. This bird once patrolled the area around the southern oceans and boasted an unbelievable wingspan of 21 feet. That's pretty extraordinary, especially by today's standards. The largest bird alive right now is the wandering albatross, with a wingspan of about 11.5 feet. Unsurprisingly, the extinct Pelagornithid was very similar to the modern albatross, just a lot bigger. This giant bird was widely distributed across the planet for around 60 million years. What's really interesting is that after scientists dated these fossils, they learned the giant albatross came on the scene just 1 million years after the dinosaurs became extinct. Just one little blip in time after the dinos and all their relatives were wiped off the planet, a 21-foot bird started soaring around the sky. According to Peter Klaus from the University of California, Berkeley, the giant albatross went on to be the apex predator of the oceans. For millions of years, with no other major competitors, the Pelagornithid was basically the shark of the skies. It even had bony protrusions in its beak that resembled extremely sharp teeth. They weren't technically teeth, though, and were more like bony shards made of keratin. But still, pretty terrifying. The world's longest canyon. Underneath the Greenland ice sheet, researchers have discovered evidence of the longest canyon ever. And yes, it's even longer than the world-famous Grand Canyon. The enormous gorge goes all the way from the highest point in central Greenland to the Petermann Glacier on the northwest coast. That's a distance of over 460 miles. But researchers believe the ravine in the canyon could be even longer, going further south, deep beneath the ice sheet where scientists can't see. If the ice wasn't here blocking the canyon, it would look almost identical to the huge chasm that's so famous in Arizona. It's 2,600 feet deep at some points and up to 6 miles wide. It also has distinctive V-shaped walls and a flat bottom. Researchers say this probably means the canyon was carved by flowing water. It's not the deepest canyon in the world, as that award still goes to the Mariana Trench at 35,827 feet. But it is the longest, even beating the 308-mile-long Yarlung Sangpo Grand Canyon in China. What makes this discovery especially interesting is the answers to questions that scientists have been asking for years. Everyone has always wondered what happens to water as it melts under Greenland's ice sheet. We know that it drains into the sea instead of pooling anywhere in the middle. But now we can see that the water is collecting at the bottom of a huge canyon and then being routed directly into the ocean. There is an entire underground river channel here, covered in a seriously thick layer of ice. UFO over the South Pole. In 2012, aliens were spotted hovering over Antarctica. A mysterious, unidentified flying object was captured on video floating over the Neumayer Station 3. The object is blurry in the footage, so it could technically be anything. UFO buffs swear it was an alien ship. Fast forward a decade, we still don't have any answers for what this mysterious thing was hovering over Antarctica. What we know is that the object appeared directly above the research station. It looked perfectly round, and it seemed to be about the size of a balloon. Not a birthday balloon, but a large weather balloon. Now, everyone has heard the weather balloon excuse before, and so this doesn't sit right with some people. After all, what in the world was a weather balloon doing so far south, lingering over a research station where tests and experiments are carried out for things like meteorology and atmospheric chemistry? It doesn't make any sense. Plus, the object appeared in frame only for a handful of seconds. Whatever this thing was, it appears to have come down from the sky, paused momentarily above the research station, and then took off again. This isn't the kind of behavior we'd expect to see with a weather balloon. We don't really know if this was proof of aliens in Antarctica, but it's definitely mysterious. All these years later, most people have forgotten all about it, and so the investigation is pretty much closed. The Antarctic Ghost Base. Deep in the icy darkness of Antarctica, there is an abandoned ghost base still running vital scientific experiments without any humans there. The remote science station had to evacuate during the polar winter because a chasm in the ice shelf was opening underneath it. The entire base was under threat of literally falling into a giant void beneath the ice. It's called the Halley Scientific Research Station, and it's been operating on the Brunt ice shelf ever since 1956. But believe it or not, these ice chasms are such a problem that it's been relocated and rebuilt several times. It was here at the fourth station in 1985 where scientists detected the hole in the ozone. In 2017, the mobile buildings had to close at their newest location, just 12 miles from the old location because of the growing hole beneath them. Ever since, scientists have figured out how to occupy the base for only part of the year, while allowing their experiments to run through the winter without them there. These days, generators supply enough electricity to the station to allow scientists in the UK to monitor everything from a distance. The result is a frozen ghost station, devoid of human life, running its own scientific experiments. Lost underwater city. Divers came across a group of circular columns and what appeared to be paved flooring off the shores of the Greek island Zakynthos. They believed at the time, in 2016, that they had come across a lost underwater city, a kind of Atlantis situation just off the coast of Greece. The columns looked like they had been shaped by human hands, and the floors were so flat and smooth they looked like the floors of temples or some other ancient buildings. This became an instant mystery and an international sensation. Nobody had any idea what this lost city was, who may have built it, or how old it was. Sadly, the mystery came to a grinding halt when scientists from the University of East Anglia came up with their own solution. According to Professor Julian Andrews, this was no lost city at all, but a geological phenomenon. Instead of archaeological remains such as pottery, the divers had simply come across structures made of hard minerals. These are called concretions, the result of faults underneath the surface releasing gases from deep within the Earth. When the gases are released, they cause a change in chemistry of the sea sediment, and it creates a kind of natural cement structure. Even though the circular structures may look like the columns of a sunken temple, they are really just fancy rocks. Humanoid fossils. In the Whitmore mountain range of Antarctica, the fossilized skeletons of extremely small humans were allegedly discovered by researchers looking for dinosaur bones. What they found instead were the fossilized remains of human beings, only about the size of somebody's foot. They appear to be about 12 or 13 inches tall, completely encased in rock. The alleged fossils were then supposedly flown to the National Institute of Ancient Studies in Washington to be analyzed. But the truly unbelievable part is that the researchers guessed the fossils to be 600 million years old. That doesn't really make any sense though, because that was back when jellyfish first appeared on Earth, way before humans. To be honest, the fossils look like fakes. There are no mainstream scientists talking about the bizarre miniature human remains discovered, and what information is out there is extremely vague. Maybe researchers did find some tiny skeletons, but it's doubtful they were 600 million years old. If it's all true, then it means Antarctica was once inhabited by a literal race of shrunken people, or maybe even fairies. Horse DNA. About a decade ago, soil samples were taken from Canada's Klondike region in the Yukon, scooped out from under a thick layer of permafrost. But instead of any scientific analysis being done to the samples, they were just stuck in a Canadian freezer at McMaster University. It wasn't until just a few months ago that researchers took the frozen soil samples out to see what they could find inside of them. And what they discovered is quite frankly shocking. These icy soil samples reveal DNA from a species of woolly mammoth and from species of wild horses that have been extinct for thousands of years. If you're wondering how animal DNA was found in the soil, it's not the same DNA you're probably thinking of. It's called environmental DNA, composed of microscopic residue left behind by a variety of animals as they move through a particular environment. By picking apart the DNA samples, scientists were able to see that animals from the Ice Age lived a lot longer than we had ever imagined before going extinct. What really shocked researchers, and indeed scientists around the world, is that the DNA present in the samples came from just 5,000 years ago. That means the woolly mammoths and the Ice Age horses, the ancestors of North American horses, were still alive in Canada alongside humans. They lived for 8,000 years longer than scientists previously thought. Antarctic jellies. An Australian research crew spent 2018 and 2019 studying the waters of Antarctica. Researcher Emiliano Cimoli from the University of Tasmania put together a short video to show what the scientists discovered. The film is about 7 minutes long, and it shows some of the strange yet beautiful creatures the scientists found flourishing in the icy water just below Antarctica's ice. One part of this study involved examining algae which lives underneath the ice, clinging to it like a mold. They say this mold-like growth is an intricate part of the food chain and helps to feed lots of the other creatures living here. By far, one of the coolest animals they focused on is a jellyfish called a sea angel. Scientists have described it as a tiny wing-flapping jelly that looks like a feather brought to life. There are various jellies underneath Antarctica's ice, but these ones are particularly fascinating. They have small orange crustaceans living on their bodies that act as parasites, easily viewable since the jellies have translucent bodies. You can even see the last meal sitting in the jelly's belly thanks to its nearly invisible skin. While most people may think Antarctica is a wasteland populated by nothing but penguins, it's actually teeming with life, especially the waters. These fantastic jellyfish are only one part of the ecosystem, which consists of hundreds of other strange and mesmerizing creatures. Black worms. Every year on Mount Rainier, billions of black ice worms appear from the ice and start crawling around. Scientists know almost nothing about the worms, nor why they wriggle out of the ice every year. Most of the time, the glacial slopes of Mount Rainier are lifeless. There's ice and snow and little else. It's only in the summer, as the snow starts to melt, that billions of worms, as small as scraps of thread, come to the surface. And even though it happens annually, scientists still haven't figured out why. But scientists do know a few things. They know this is the only species of worm that spends its entire life living in ice. They know that as the glaciers on the mountain begin to shrink, the worms are at risk of going extinct. They also know that despite living in the ice for months at a time, they can't actually tolerate freezing temperatures. Their entire existence is on the edge of tolerance. They remain perfectly fine while buried in the ice, like living in a warm igloo, but freezing winds in the warmer months can kill them. Scientists don't know how they survive the winter, but they believe they eat bacteria and algae in the summer as they squirm along the surface of the ice. Other than that, the worms remain a total mystery. The Octavius. The Octavius set sail from England in 1761 on its way to the Far East. This was a long and hard journey to make, and not many captains could steer their ships all the way around the world to India. And so, the captain of the Octavius wanted to prove his skill and decided he would try the Northwest Passage on the return trip home. Unfortunately for everyone on board, they were never seen alive again. The ship became stuck in the ice north of Alaska for 13 years. It was discovered on October 11, 1775 by a whaling ship called the Herald. It was found floating west of Greenland, and the entire crew of 28 was frozen and dead below deck, perfectly preserved like human icicles. Unfortunately, we don't actually know if any of this is true. The story of Octavius is a marine legend. The captain's body was supposedly discovered at the table in his cabin, with his pen frozen in his hand. He had frozen to death still trying to write in his captain's log. The last entry was from November of 1762, which indicated the ship had been frozen for 13 years. There aren't any legitimate historical records of the ship ever existing aside from the anecdotes and legends. After the whaling ship departed, the Octavius was never seen again. Some say it's still floating across the seas to this very day as a spooky ghost ship. Hitler's ice base. There's no proof exactly that Hitler ever built a secret ice base in Antarctica. However, to many, that doesn't mean it's not true. In the late 1930s, the Nazis showed an extreme, almost obsessive interest in the icy continent. They sent a small expedition to survey the northern part of it and claim it for themselves. This was in December of 1938. The Germans were hoping to claim a large part of Antarctica, one that had already been claimed by the Norwegians. It was a total failure, and with everything going on when war broke out, Germany wasn't able to launch any additional expeditions to the south. But here's where things get weird. A man named Ladislas Zabel wrote a detailed account in a local Argentinian newspaper in 1945. He was a Hungarian exile who apparently had some inside information. He claimed that the German U-boat U-530, which arrived at an Argentine naval base on July 10, 1945, had been carrying Hitler and his lover Eva Braun. He said the U-boat had taken Hitler to the secret base that his team had built back in 1938 in Antarctica. And so Hitler supposedly spent his final days isolated with Eva Braun in a makeshift shack in Antarctica. There is no other proof of this except a rumor. Nobody has found the remains of Hitler's supposed ice base. But you just never know what's out there hiding under the ice. What do you think about this theory? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Frozen Brazilian yacht. The Mar Sem film, which in English translates roughly to Endless Sea, is a Brazilian yacht that was frozen in a solid brick of ice. The ship broke apart in Maxwell Bay on April 7, 2012. How? The yacht, which belonged to the famed Brazilian journalist and entrepreneur João Mesquita, was manned by 4 crews who were filming a documentary off the Antarctic coast when the boat ultimately capsized after being pummeled with strong winds of over 40 knots, along with waves estimated to be nearly 6 feet tall. The researchers were forced to radio for help before they all froze to death. Luckily, there happened to be a Chilean Navy base in the area. They were rescued by the Navy, though there was nothing that could be done about the yacht. It sank, but it didn't get very far. The yacht only made it about 30 feet deep before the water froze. The vessel's hull split in half, and it became trapped in ice. It made for an eerie picture, trapped beneath the surface and still clearly visible from above. The yacht's owner waited 10 months until the ice thawed and an attempt to recover the boat could finally be made. Ultimately, the time spent under the ice and the hull damage was too great to be repaired. Even once they got the ship back onto the shore, it was completely broken and beyond fixing, destined only for the salvage yard. Mysterious cave. Thanks to Google Maps, a mysterious and unexplained cave was discovered on a remote island in Antarctica. Some wild claims have come up surrounding this bizarre cave, with some people saying it could be the entrance to Hollow Earth. Some call it a military cover-up, and some even say it might have something to do with aliens. What we know about the cave is that it first appeared on Google Maps in 2007, and then was gone 6 months later. At least this is according to the Google enthusiasts who have been busy tracking the phenomenon. The cave can be found on Greenwich Island, located in the south of Antarctica. While no trace of it appears to be left today, it was still definitely there in 2007. The big question is why the massive opening into the Earth suddenly vanished after people found it and started talking about it online. And of course, the question as to what was hiding at the bottom of that cave. One of the prevailing theories is that the cave is a secret entrance to Hollow Earth. Hollow Earth is a fringe conspiracy theory which says underneath the surface of the planet is a secondary landscape, a massive land with its own atmosphere, with towering mountains and strange monsters. This place is only accessible through massive caves leading down hundreds of miles into the ground. Nobody has ever been able to prove it, and pretty much every major scientist says it's nothing but science fiction. In truth, the cave probably vanished from Google Maps because it collapsed or was frozen over with ice. In the end, unless you see it with your own eyes, you just can't know for sure. And now for number 6. But first, it's shout-out time! I want to say a big thank you to Floyd Reeby and Mike Mueller for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. Ice Age beaver. At the bottom of a frozen gravel pit in southeastern Manitoba, an anonymous man came across the bone of a monster, the likes of which you wouldn't believe. The creature lived across North America during the Ice Age, but went extinct a few thousand years ago. It was larger than a black bear, vicious enough to easily kill a person, and yet it was just a beaver. But it was a gigantic beaver. The bone at the bottom of the pit belonged to a prehistoric relative of the modern beaver, but the founder thought it was a pig bone. They brought it to the local museum during their lunch hour because they noticed it had a tooth like a tusk and thought it might be ancient. The man who found the bone had never even heard of giant beavers before, and to be honest, most people haven't. So far, this is only the 4th piece of evidence that these giant monsters lived in Canada. When compared to a modern beaver, it was truly huge. A modern beaver could easily bite a person's hand off with their huge teeth, which they use to bite through wood. But this ancient relative could easily cause significantly more damage with one bite. It weighed about 300 pounds and could grow to at least 6 feet in length. These days, beavers only weigh around 20 pounds and don't grow bigger than a medium-sized dog. The ancient species went extinct at the end of the last ice age around 10,000 years ago. What do you think about this enormous beaver? Let me know in the comments below. Corpse ships in Japan. In 2015, Japan was having trouble with ghost ships washing up on its shores. Over a span of 2 months, 12 wooden boats were discovered adrift off the coast of Japan, carrying with them a disturbing cargo. Between the 12 wooden boats, Japanese authorities discovered the bodies of at least 22 people. These bodies weren't freshly dead either, but were already partially skeletonized. 2 of the bodies didn't have their heads. One boat contained 6 skulls for some reason, and all the corpses were vigorously decomposed. They appeared to have been dead and adrift at sea for a very long time, and it wasn't immediately clear where in the world they had come from. The Coast Guard in Japan immediately launched an investigation trying to unravel the mystery of the ghost boats. And while they weren't able to verify 100% where they had started their journey, they did make some educated guesses. The Japanese authorities believed that the boats came from North Korea and that they were carrying desperate North Korean defectors trying to flee the country. Sadly, this became less of a ghoulish mystery and more of a tale of tragedy. One of the boats had scraps of cloth that looked like a North Korean flag, which helped put the pieces together. It appears that the people in the boats fled North Korea by sea, only to get lost in the open ocean with no food or water. The people all perished inside the boats, and their skin literally fell off their bones. Later, their bones were bleached by the sun before the tide finally brought them to the Japanese coast. Ancient bones. It was in 1985 that a very interesting skull was discovered on Yamana Beach in Antarctica's South Shetland Islands. It wasn't the skull of a dinosaur or of some creepy Antarctic monster. Rather, it belonged to an indigenous woman who had lived in southern Chile and died in her early 20s. The skull was over a century old, suggesting the woman died sometime around 1819 to 1825. And even though this makes the skull only about 200 years old, it is still the oldest piece of human remains found on the continent. The place where the skull was found was once a camp for sealers in the 19th century. These were the people that hunted seals for their blubber and fur. But because there were no female sealers, nobody really knows where this woman fit in. Maybe she was a captive. She may have been stolen from Chile by foreign sealers and brought to the camp. Or she may have been there with her own group of hunters. It's all very confusing and nobody knows the truth. What's important is that this woman's skull could play a key role in determining who Antarctica belongs to in the coming years. You see, there's currently a treaty that says Antarctica is a natural reserve, not owned by anyone and specifically used for scientific research. When that treaty expires in the year 2048, nations could start fighting over who gets to mine Antarctica's resources. And when that happens, the oldest human skull found on the continent could give Chile a more legitimate claim than other countries. And now for number 5. But first, want to give a big shout out to DefTweet44 and Dondia L. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, welcome, and be sure to subscribe for more videos about amazing discoveries. Dangerous gases. Rising temperatures in the Arctic are causing a change in the environment. In the black spruce forest found in central Alaska along the Tanana River, trees have been tipping over, toppling to the ground, and slowly being absorbed by a soupy bog. Where once the ground was hard-packed ice, today it's more of a sloppy swamp of rain and snowmelt. There is no denying that the world is steadily getting warmer and the permafrost in the north is thawing. One of the most horrendous things to come from all this melting permafrost is an increase in greenhouse gases. A recent study done by Alaska scientist Merit Turetsky and his team have found that under the ice there is a lot more gas than previously thought. They have confirmed in recent years that as the ice thaws, huge bursts of gas are gushing into the atmosphere. It's a process known as abrupt thaw, with gases being released from the ice contributing majorly to the very issue causing all this gas to be released in the first place. Still, all the gas being found under the ice doesn't have nearly as big of an impact as what people are doing by burning coal and creating other emissions. Thawing permafrost is, however, expected to amplify climate change caused by humans. According to a recent report by National Geographic, the effects will be amplified by about 20%, and all because of gas under the ice. Subglacial Lake. Lake Snow Eagle is a newly discovered subglacial lake hiding underneath Antarctica. By subglacial, I mean the lake is buried underneath glacial ice. From one side to the other, the lake is about 26 miles long, making it one of the biggest of its kind on the continent. It's hiding inside a canyon in East Antarctica, covered and invisible from above by an insanely thick ice sheet. The only way to discover this kind of thing is by using advanced research equipment. Scientists had to use a polar research aircraft equipped with the latest tools to identify the lake under the ice. What's interesting is that it's only a couple hundred miles from the coast, and this has given the scientists an idea. They think that because it's so close to the sea, the mysterious lake could contain information as to how the ice sheet formed in the first place. The lake is about 34 million years old. Because of that, it almost certainly contains geological evidence of Antarctica's past. Dr. Don Blankenship from the Institute for Geophysics at the University of Texas says that as of now, researchers know that something changed with the ice sheet 10,000 years ago. They don't know what or why. As they dig deeper into the subglacial lake, they are hoping to uncover secrets of Antarctica's past. Sediment at the bottom of the lake should yield clues as to every little thing that's happened on the continent for the last tens of millions of years. Solar storm trapped in the ice. A research team from the Lund University in Sweden analyzed ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica and found evidence of a bizarre cosmic phenomenon. They found that a solar storm, one of extreme magnitude, took place 9,200 years ago. It's confusing scientists because the storm happened during a quiet phase in the sun's life, in which they believed such events didn't occur. Up until now, scientists thought solar storms only happen during sunspot cycles, when the star becomes extremely active, but judging by what the researchers found in the ice, that's clearly not the case. They found in the ice cores traces of radioactive isotopes that are only produced when high-energy cosmic particles reach the planet's surface. Here's what's really scary about the discovery. The solar storm released so much radioactivity that if it had happened today, it could have wiped out power across the globe. Every city on Earth would have been plunged into darkness, and satellites would have fallen from the sky from radioactive damage. Air traffic would have been in serious trouble, and astronauts would have had their communication systems fail. Basically, a solar storm of this magnitude would have caused pandemonium on Earth. We may have missed the last one, but another could come at literally any second. 5 minutes, 5 days, or 500,000 years from now. The USS Maine. On the night of February 15, 1898, the U.S. battleship Maine was secured off the coast of Cuba. It exploded for an unknown reason that very night, filling the dark sky with fire and tossing dead and wounded sailors like ragdolls into the waters of Havana Harbor. The explosion caused a political catastrophe between the United States and Spain, since they had already been disputing Cuba as the island nation struggled for independence. Shortly after the explosion, the Spanish-American War began. But that's another story altogether. What we want to know is what sank the USS Maine. Over 100 years later, we still don't know. Some experts say it was an underwater mine, some say an accident on board, and some even say a primitive torpedo. There is even a crazy conspiracy theory that says newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst sabotaged the ship. His goal was to force Spain and America to go to war, and that way, he could sell more newspapers. The reality is there is no way to solve the mystery all these years later, and we'll probably never know. The history books claim it was Spain's fault, that they had torn a hole in the bottom of the ship on purpose. But according to a study in 1976, the damage was self-inflicted. The study claimed it was a coal fire in the belly of the ship that ignited stacks of gunpowder, an accident that started a war. We may never know for sure exactly what happened to the USS Maine, since the only contributing evidence we have today is the previous studies and 100-year-old photographs. The HMS Endurance. Antarctic explorers have finally discovered the HMS Endurance, hiding 2 miles beneath the surface of the ocean. The discovery of the lost vessel has been called the most challenging shipwreck search ever conducted. If you don't know too much about the HMS Endurance, let me give you a quick recap. The expedition was headed by Sir Ernest Shackleton in 1915 to explore Antarctica. But once it got trapped in pack ice in the Weddell Sea, the ship broke apart and sank. It then sat on the bottom of the sea for 107 years, before it was finally discovered in March of 2022. Menson Bound, the director of the exploration, said it's the finest wooden shipwreck he has ever seen in his whole life. While you might expect such an old ship to have broken apart, the Antarctic cold has actually left it remarkably preserved. Even the name Endurance is still written legibly across the stern. How was it so perfectly preserved? It's because the sea life that would normally feed on wood simply isn't present in such icy waters. Instead of the wood being eaten, the whole ship has been colonized by Antarctic sea squirts and sponges. Jewels on a French glacier. Back in 2013, a mountaineer was climbing Mont Blanc, the French glacier, when he came across a literal treasure. The treasure was stashed inside a metal box, which experts say was on board a plane from India that crashed into the mountain over 50 years earlier. The mountaineer couldn't believe his luck when he pried open the metal box and was staring at a treasure trove of emeralds, sapphires, and rubies. They were just sitting right there, the metal box half frozen in a chunk of glacier ice. In total, the treasure is worth an estimated $340,000. The mountaineer turned out to be a really good citizen as well. After he finished climbing the mountain, he handed the treasure over to the local authorities. He didn't want to steal somebody's precious gems. Additionally, if you find treasure in the mountains, French law says you have to give it to the police. And in the end, being a good citizen really paid off.
8 years after the discovery, local authorities finally agreed to split the profit from the gemstones with the climber. That's a total profit for him of $169,000. But you're probably wondering what the box of treasure had to do with the plane that crashed. In 1950 and in 1966, there were plane crashes on Mont Blanc, both of them Air India planes. Over the years, climbers have occasionally stumbled upon chunks of debris, human bodies, and pieces of luggage frozen in the ice. Authorities say the precious stones were probably from the flight in 1966, bound for New York. The crash killed 117 people, and one of them had apparently brought a whole hoard of jewels into America. What would you do if you found a box of jewels frozen in ice? Would you hand it over to the authorities or stash it away and hide it? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe before you go. We have lots more videos coming up. Fresh plastic. In a shocking and hardly believable first, scientists have discovered microplastics in fresh Antarctic snow. Fresh means snow that has recently fallen from the sky. In other words, scientists have found snow infused with plastic particles beginning to blanket Antarctica. It shows just how extensive global plastic pollution is, seeing as it's already in the water cycle and coming down in Antarctica in snowflakes. The research was done by scientists at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand. They looked at snow samples from 19 different places across the Ross ice shelf. When they looked at these samples, they found plastic particles, specifically the kind of plastic that can be found everywhere on Earth in clothes and water bottles. But here's what's even more disturbing. The study found that 29 particles per liter of melted snow are made of plastic. That's even higher than concentrations in the water around Antarctica. That means there's a higher concentration of plastic up in the clouds than in the ocean. The find was pretty depressing to the scientists, who traveled to Antarctica in 2019, optimistic there would be no microplastics in such a remote place. Sadly, they were completely wrong. Patterns in the ice. The phenomenon of ice needles is pretty fascinating. They form during an imbalance between the temperature of soil and the temperature of the air. When the temperature drops at night, some types of dirt will contract, while water in the soil is drawn upward. The result is billions of tiny frozen needles sticking out of the ground. It's shocking to see, and is surprisingly helping scientists learn more about the planet Mars. If you've ever gotten up early in the morning and walked across a field and heard crunching underfoot from the frosty grass, you were probably walking over ice needles. It happens all the time. But in some more extreme places in the world, the recurring pattern of ice needles create delicate designs like geoglyphs. As the needles freeze, they push very small rocks onto one side or the other. Over a very long time, these rocks become clustered in geological formations that look as though they were made by human hands. Looking at one of these clusters from above, you would think it was an ancient civilization trying to draw a picture using tiny rocks. What scientists find amazing and confusing is that the same patterns made by ice needles on Earth have been seen on Mars. The obvious takeaway is that Mars definitely once had oceans, and that there is still moisture in the soil. When it gets colder at night, that moisture is sucked out into the form of very small ice needles. These needles, over thousands of years, have created complex patterns all across the surface. The legendary Kraken. In 2014, Captain John Bennett's crew dragged an unbelievable creature into their fishing boat. They had been fishing in the remote Ross Sea of Antarctica, and nobody had been expecting to reel in a literal monster. And yet, that was exactly what they found. They hauled a squid into the boat that weighed over 770 pounds, a biblical sea monster which was captured from over 1 mile below the surface. The marine monster was actually a colossal squid, which was about the length of a small bus. The fishermen brought the specimen to shore, handed it over to scientists, and they kept it frozen for 8 months while doing studies. One of the squid scientists involved, Kat Bolstad, said it was an unprecedented opportunity to examine a colossal squid. After all, scientists don't know that much about these aquatic animals. Colossal squid are so big and live so deep in the ocean, it's extremely rare that they are captured in fishermen's nets. But the real mystery is trying to figure out if it's the same colossal squid responsible for the ancient myths of the legendary Kraken.
As you may know already, the Kraken first appeared in written history in the 13th century in Icelandic lore, but stories of the tentacled beast can be found much earlier and from all over the world. Scientists wonder if it was the colossal squid that gave birth to these legends, or if there was an even bigger squid that has since gone extinct. A squid so gargantuan, it really could have brought down entire fleets of ships. A rock from space. Scientists conducting studies at the Princess Elizabeth Antarctica Research Station discovered a massive chunk of chondrite stuck in the ice. The scientists were purposely looking for meteorites that they believed to be scattered across the Nansen ice field in late January. That was when they came across the unexpectedly enormous 40-pound hunk of chondrite. It proved to be the biggest meteorite anyone has ever found in East Antarctica in the past 25 years. Here's something you might not know. Antarctica is one of the best places in the world to go meteorite hunting. This may have been the biggest specimen the team ever discovered, roughly the size of a fat pumpkin, but it wasn't the only one. By the end of their investigations, they had plucked 165 pounds of meteorites out of the ice. In total, they packed 425 meteorites in their luggage to take back to their laboratories for research. Why are there so many meteorites in Antarctica? It's not that more space rocks land here than anywhere else. It's the fact that thanks to the endless stretches of white ice and snow, black space rocks are incredibly easy to find. It's like Easter egg hunting in the snow with giant black eggs. Anybody want to go? Let me know.
Cold War fossils. Back during the Cold War, the U.S. was busy digging out a chunk of northwestern Greenland as part of Project Iceworm. It was in 1966. A covert mission to create a nuclear base beneath the Greenland ice sheet capable of striking the Soviet Union with nuclear warheads. The project was kept top secret until decades later, and even still, it's hard to believe the US tried something so unusual. Creating a subterranean ice base sounds more like the plot of a spy movie than an actual US military project. But the mission was a failure. Project Iceworm was ultimately ended. Camp Century, the base itself, was abandoned. So too were ice core samples taken by scientists during the initial construction of the base. But the US didn't care about boring old ice cores back then, so the samples were stuffed in a freezer in Denmark and ignored for decades. Then, in 2019, a group of scientists finally investigated what the Cold War scientists had dug up, and it's really quite fascinating. The scientists found fragments of fossilized plants, life forms that bloomed millions of years ago. These plants prove that Greenland hasn't really been covered in ice for that long. Up until now, it was believed that Greenland had been covered in ice for 3 million years, but that couldn't possibly be the case. The fossilized plants show beyond a doubt that there was significant tundra-like climate on Greenland during that time, which wouldn't have been possible if the ice wasn't there. Scientists believe that at some point in the last 2.6 million years, Greenland lost its giant ice sheet, shifted to a tundra, and eventually regained its ice. Mount Everest's ice problem. There have been plenty of amazing things discovered on Everest frozen in ice, from the bodies of hikers to leftover equipment from ancient expeditions, but there probably won't be very many more. According to National Geographic, a new study has found that the South Pole Glacier of Mount Everest has lost half its ice mass since the 1990s. The highest glacier on the tallest mountain on the planet has lost 2,000 years of ice in only 3 decades. What that means is that all the ice that accumulated over 2,000 years has melted in just 30 years. To put this as simply as possible, there won't be ice on Everest for very much longer. These findings weren't easy to come by. National Geographic and Rolex Perpetual Planet Everest expedition brought together over 34 international scientists and teams of Sherpas to take ice core samples and biological samples all over the mountain. They created a very detailed map of Everest's glacial history. They were able to look at the amount of ice on the mountain, where the ice was over the past 2,000 years. They found the oldest layer of ice on the very top of their core samples to be 2,000 years old. That means that everything that had been laid down after is already gone. There is no word on how much longer Everest will remain icy, but when looking at the numbers, we can estimate about 20 more years before the whole mountain is dry. The road to Atlantis.
Scientists in the Pacific Ocean have just discovered the road to Atlantis. Oceanographers doing scientific experiments aboard the EV Nautilus were looking at the floor of the ocean off the coast of Hawaii when they made the discovery in April of 2022. The particular area they were observing happens to be within a massive underwater volcanic mountain range. At a depth of 3,376 feet, near the top of the Nootka Seamount, lies the mysterious road. Scientists could not believe their eyes. Even more amazing is that the discovery was made while the team of scientists was broadcasting their 24/7 live stream on YouTube. Everyone who was watching got to see the strangely uniform road of yellow stones come into view. But is this really the road to Atlantis? Or a road to some other ancient submerged city? That's a question that's hard to answer. Scientists say that only about 3% of this particular volcanic range underwater has been explored. This means there could technically be ruins somewhere. Its peaks rise to over 16,000 feet above the seabed, with the tallest summit a mere 200 feet beneath the surface. It's not that outrageous to think the sea level rose thousands of years ago, covering a city that had previously been on an island. However, the scientists were quick to point out that the road, even though it appears to be paved in yellow bricks, is almost certainly a geological formation. It looks like a road, and there is no way at the moment to prove it isn't, but the scientists doubt that it leads to a lost city. Giant monster egg. 2011, researchers discovered a large and very peculiar fossil in Antarctica. Recently, this mysterious fossil has been identified as a giant egg that was laid by a marine reptile 66 million years ago. The egg had been sitting in a collection at the National Museum of Natural History in Chile until a team from the University of Texas came along and analyzed it. They found the egg to be approximately 11.7 inches in length, which makes it the largest specimen of a soft-shell egg ever found. It's also the second largest of any egg, hard or soft, found from any species. Paleontologists are fairly certain the egg was laid by an extinct marine monster known as a mosasaur. Considering how huge the egg is, it very clearly belonged to a truly tremendous animal. It's the size of a dinosaur egg, but at the same time, nothing like a dinosaur egg. One of the lead researchers, Lucas Legendre, says the egg is more similar to those from lizards and snakes. But because of its size, it was obviously laid by a monumental beast. The egg is bigger than most human heads, whereas even the biggest reptile eggs these days would be able to fit in the palm of a person's hand. Scientists haven't been able to 100% verify what kind of animal laid the egg, but all we know is that it was huge, and it was probably a sea monster. Monstrous birds. 50 million years ago, there was a bird that looked kind of like an albatross. Only for a mouth, this bird had a hacksaw. It also had a wingspan of about 21 feet. It was bigger than a car and was probably one of the largest birds to ever take to the skies. This beast belonged to a family of ancient avian animals called pelagornithid. And to give you an example of just how big they were, they absolutely dwarfed the largest bird alive right now by wingspan, the albatross, with a measly 11.5 feet. Evidence of this monstrosity has been found in Antarctica. Researchers came across a portion of a bird's fossilized foot from 50 million years ago. It's amazing because it shows that after the extinction of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago, birds bounced back in a big way. The dinosaurs were dead and the world was ruled by dragon-like birds. And apparently, they like to hang out in Antarctica. This discovery was also pretty fascinating because it proved to be the oldest pelagornithid bone ever uncovered, over 10 million years older than a jawbone from 40 million years ago. And that's not the only crazy thing, because the last known pelagornithid only died a brief 2.5 million years ago, right around the time revolving ice ages started. This huge bony-toothed bird could have been living in Antarctica even after the legendary megalodon went extinct. Expedition ship frozen solid. In 2014, an Antarctic expedition ship became stranded in the ice. Members of the Australasian Antarctic expedition on board the MV Academic Shokolaski got stuck for 10 days at Christmas, with absolutely no way out. They had to call in a Chinese icebreaker to come to their rescue, along with a reroute of an Australian icebreaker to help.
they originally called a French icebreaker, but it had to retreat when it became clear that the ice was so thick that even it couldn't help out the ship. 52 members of the expedition were trapped until a helicopter team finally came to airlift the scientists and tourists to safety. When the ship got stuck, it was trying to make its way through clear water to a small cluster of rocky islands called the HMS Islands. But the clear water suddenly froze. The ice came out of nowhere and they couldn't move. By Christmas Eve, the captain realized there was no way they could get to the open water just 2 nautical miles in front of them. The ice was thick and just kept accumulating. After a few more days, open water was no longer 2 nautical miles ahead, but 20 nautical miles. That's just how fast the ice builds up in Antarctica. With almost no warning, the ship was trapped in a rapidly growing iceberg. With international help, the ship was finally freed, but it was a very close call. The wreckage of the Endurance. 2 miles beneath the water in the Weddell Sea, not far from the mainland of Antarctica, Ernest Shackleton's legendary vessel, the Endurance, has been found. It's sitting on the Antarctic sea floor, almost 10,000 feet below, since it was last seen in 1915. That was when Shackleton, an Irish-British explorer, watched with his crew of 27 men as their ship sank into the chaotic depths of the ocean. Their mission had been to reach the South Pole by traveling through uncharted territory in eastern Antarctica. Shackleton proved too reckless, too obsessed with getting to the South Pole, and so he ignored the warnings of local whalers. They told him not to go in 1914 because of poor ice conditions. Shackleton thought he knew better than the experienced whalers, and his ship ended up sinking. Still, Shackleton proved to be a most resilient leader. He led his stranded men to Elephant Island, where they set up camp in the snow. He then took 5 of his men and embarked on a journey across 800 miles of freezing water to reach South Georgia Island. And once there, he recruited help to go back and pick up the rest of the crew. All these years later, the Endurance has finally been uncovered, documented, and photographed. A team of researchers traveled on the South African icebreaker SS Waratah 2, searched for 2 weeks, then used submersible crafts to scan the sea floor. Finally, they came across the legendary vessel, and because of the cold Antarctic temperatures, the Endurance looks exactly the same as it did when it sank over a century ago. The Scimitar cat. A decade ago, in Canada's frozen Klondike region, a mysterious bone was found in the permafrost at a Dominion Creek mining camp. It was 2011 when the bone was found, and yet scientists are still making discoveries because of it. Researchers are unsure exactly how old the bone is, with experts guessing about 50,000 years. It belonged to a predatory animal that lived alongside the woolly mammoth, the woolly rhino, and extinct North American horses. This animal was the scimitar cat, a ferocious feline you've probably never heard of. It was a type of saber-toothed cat, but without the great big front teeth. It was unique in that it had great eyesight and increased endurance compared to a lot of other big cats. Unlike big felines today, like cheetahs and lions, who can only use one burst of amazing speed to catch their prey, the scimitar cat could run pretty much forever. It evolved with the ability to chase its prey until its prey collapsed. This thing would chase a horse until the horse fell down from exhaustion. Sadly, we don't know much else about these animals. There have only been a handful of scimitar cat fossils found, so not much for researchers to study. We don't even know how many of these cats once roamed North America during the Ice Age. Crumbling shipwreck. Archaeologists discovered a mysterious shipwreck in 2013 buried at the bottom of a stream. But only recently did the researchers begin the long and arduous process of taking the boat apart piece by piece to solve its mystery. The issue is that the shipwreck is old, 1,300 years old to be exact. Its timbers are so fragile that the air itself will destroy them if they aren't sprayed with water every 30 minutes. The boat is currently under the protection of the French National Institute for Preventive Archaeological Research. They say the boat has been carbon dated to around 680 AD, to the Middle Ages. It was originally 40 feet long, and it could have been used to navigate large rivers and shallow coastal waters along France and the Atlantic.
The mystery scientists are still trying to figure out who built the boat and what it had been used for. We don't know if it was built by the tribal people of the Franks while they were dominating much of Western Europe after the Roman Empire had fallen, but it does date back to around that time. It may have even just been an ordinary fishing boat. We just will never know for certain. Nesting fish. About 1,500 feet beneath the ice in Antarctica is the Weddell Sea, one of the coldest bodies of water on the entire planet. It's located between the Antarctic Peninsula and the main bulk of the continent. It's a pretty cold place, but not completely devoid of life. Deep-sea biologist Atun Purser and his colleagues recently stumbled across the largest nesting fish colony ever seen by human eyes. These researchers found what is essentially a natural fish nursery, but bigger than anything you could imagine. They identified about 60 million active icefish nests spread across an area the size of Orlando, Florida. This is an amazing discovery for a handful of reasons. First of all, researchers have only ever come across a handful of icefish nests at one time, never more than a few dozen. Up until now, nobody even knew the impact of the Antarctic icefish on the food web. They were just kind of a mystery. They were icy-veined fish that live in the coldest part of the world. Now we know they've been kept safe by the ice above them, which acts like a shield against fishermen. It really makes you wonder what the rest of the ocean would have looked like before mass fishing and whale hunts became a thing, when the entire sea was bursting with all kinds of life.
Ultra-hot, super ionic ice. Scientists have made a fascinating new discovery involving ice. They call the discovery ultra-hot, super ionic ice, and it appears to be a new and mysterious phase of water never seen before. Scientists created this new form of ice by squeezing a water droplet between a pair of diamonds and then blasting it with one of the most powerful lasers in the world. See? Science is fun! The super ionic ice is actually water that exists at the same pressure and temperature as what can be found at the center of the Earth. Prior to this discovery, researchers had only managed to create superionic ice for 20 nanoseconds before it dissolved. They did this by using shock waves. But by squeezing a water droplet between the diamonds and then blasting it with the laser to temperatures found inside a star, they were able to make the ice stable enough to steady. This is now the 18th phase of ice to be discovered, and one of the weirdest. Its oxygen atoms lock into place just like they normally do when water freezes. But the hydrogen atoms give up their electrons and become ions, free-flowing as a fluid. What this means is that ultra-hot superionic ice is both a solid and a liquid at the same time. It's a cube of ice with flowing hydrogen atoms inside of it. Pretty incredible, huh? Would you ever think of blasting lasers at diamond-squeezed water droplets? Didn't think so.
Unknown life. A series of mysterious caves have been discovered in Antarctica. Scientists say the caves are warm enough that they could support plant and animal species, but nobody knows just yet. The issue is that Australian scientists from Australian National University found the caves hidden underneath the icy surface of Antarctica, but they haven't been able to look inside them. The caves have been created by steam leaking out from Mount Erebus, potentially one of the most dangerous volcanoes in Antarctica. The steam has made a kind of labyrinth of tunnels and caverns underneath the ice, and has also helped to keep it warm inside. Believe it or not, these Antarctic caves can reach temperatures of 77 degrees Fahrenheit. There is also quite a bit of light filtering through the ice, which could help plants to grow. In all likelihood, the life forms living in these caves are things like moss and algae, but there could be small invertebrates as well. Maybe some really small bugs or tiny living organisms. Researchers won't know until they can physically search the caves and look for potential life forms. World War II plane in the Alps. A melting glacier in Switzerland recently revealed a plane from World War II that crashed in the Alps. It was 2018 when a heat wave caused massive amounts of ice on the Gowrie Glacier to simply vanish. This revealed the ruined bones of a C-52 Sky Trooper Dakota. On November 19, 1946, the plane had been traveling from Austria to Italy when it smacked right into the glacier. The collision was at 10,990 feet, making the plane wreckage impossible to recover. However, there was a rescue operation. 4 crew members and 8 passengers walked away with nothing but minor injuries, being rescued 6 days later. There wasn't a single fatality.
They survived by drinking snow water and eating the few chocolate bars they had to share between them. In 2012, a trio of hikers came across the plane's propeller on the glacier, but they couldn't see the rest of the plane. It wasn't until 6 years later when enough of the ice melted to reveal the entire thing. It's in surprisingly good shape thanks to being stuck in a block of ice for over 70 years. The SS Waratah. Speaking of mysterious boats, let's check out the disappearance of the SS Waratah. This was a passenger and cargo steamship built back in 1908. Its purpose was to travel between Europe and Australia, bringing passengers and cargo across the open seas. But in July of 1909, this ship's second voyage, she vanished while somewhere off the coast of South Africa. She was between Durban and Cape Town when she simply evaporated into thin air, with 211 passengers, full of manned crew aboard. Over 100 years later, the mystery has never been solved, and the SS Waratah has never been found. Although it's still a mystery, there are definitely theories. Some say the ship was hit by a freak wave that sucked it into the ocean. Others say that because the Waratah was carrying a massive load of around 1,000 tons of lead and 300 tons of lead ore concentrate, the cargo destabilized the ship and it capsized. Another theory states that the Waratah was caught in a monstrous whirlpool. Fierce winds, raging ocean currents, and a deep ocean trench created a swirling drain of water to suck the ocean liner down into its dark and murky depths. The Loch Ness Monster. In 2019, yet another shocking fossil was discovered in Antarctica. This one is quite a bit different from the terrifying bird I told you about earlier. Scientists believe it could represent the real-life Loch Ness Monster, the biggest sea dinosaur that ever lived. The fossil is approximately 70 million years old, the petrified remains of an elasmosaur that could have weighed upwards of 15 tons. It's called the real Loch Ness Monster because of the myths that say Nessie is really just a long-necked plesiosaur that somehow managed to stay alive for millions of years. Plesiosaurs were once diverse marine reptiles with long necks and flat paddle-like flippers. Some say they looked like huge manatees with long giraffe necks and heads like snakes. And the elasmosaur was the biggest among all of them, a true sea monster. It does make sense that an elasmosaur fossil would be found in Antarctica. They dominated all the oceans of the world during the Cretaceous period, up until they went extinct. Sadly, or maybe not sadly, they did go extinct over 65 million years ago. And because of this, coupled with the fact that Loch Ness is only technically 10,000 years old, it's doubtful there is an elasmosaur living in the loch. And for those wondering, there is almost definitely no elasmosaur hiding in Antarctica. Mysteriously draining lakes. NASA has discovered a mysterious system of draining lakes beneath the Antarctic ice. They found 2 new lakes of frigid water between 1.2 and 2.5 miles beneath the ice on the southernmost part of the continent. What's truly strange is that these subterranean lakes fill and drain repeatedly in a cycle that scientists say could influence how meltwater flows into the Southern Ocean. And of course, the flow of meltwater from the ice is what influences currents in the Southern Ocean, affecting temperatures across the world. The lakes are located at the very bottom of the ice sheet, where the ice touches the rocky part of the Antarctic continent. Scientists believe the lakes are formed as a result of pressure and friction, and maybe even geothermal heat from below. Whatever the case, scientists only discovered the lakes because of NASA's ICESat satellite using lasers to measure elevations of the ice. As the lakes fill and then drain, the ice above rises and falls. This shows there is a lake system beneath, releasing water into the ocean. Just how much water? In January, scientists found that just one of these lakes, located beneath the Amory ice shelf in eastern Antarctica, flushed about 198 billion gallons into the ocean in just 3 days. And while this may sound kind of boring, it's actually a critical system that influences seasonal dips in temperature as cold air currents move around the world. Discovering why billions of gallons of horribly cold water are dumped into the ocean from under the ice is key in understanding how all the weather systems of our world are connected. Ship in the ice. In 1985, the Soviet Union dispatched a giant icebreaker to Antarctica. They did this because one of their research vessels had gotten trapped in the thick ice with 53 people on board. The vessel got stuck in 12 feet of thick, nearly indestructible ice. Those 53 men were stuck in the polar nights with bitter frost in their lungs and literally nowhere to go. Even though the Russian icebreaker, the Vladivostok, went to save them in early June, it wouldn't reach them until July, and so they were stranded there for nearly 2 months. The ship that was stuck was the Mikhail Somov, built in 1975 as a Russian research vessel. After spending all summer in the ice, the Vladivostok finally reached it, broke enough ice for the ship to get out, and everyone was saved. This was over 50 years ago, and there hasn't been quite this dramatic of an Antarctic rescue since then. Arctic Ice Camp. There's been a significant amount of submarine activity in the Arctic ice during the past few years. We've seen a trio of Russian submarines break through the ice, and even the US has been busy creating ice camps and practicing their own submarine maneuvers in the Arctic. In fact, scientists with the University of Alaska Fairbanks helped to provide ice and weather expertise to the U.S. Navy in 2020 during Arctic Ocean training. The Navy constructed Camp Sea Dragon, a temporary hub on an ice sheet in the middle of the Arctic Ocean. The camp had more than 45 personnel, serving as a command center for submarine operations. They also held under-ice navigational exercises for their submarines. This has helped the Navy learn how to travel undetected beneath the ice in case of some Arctic conflict. Creepy fossilized brain. Scientists have discovered the mysterious fossil of a marine creature that lived over 500 million years ago. More specifically, they found the perfectly fossilized brain of this creature, a primitive form of prawn that had 3 eyes. Scientists say that thanks to its preserved brain and its complete central nervous system still visible in the fossil, they can now learn more about the origins of the creepiest things in the world, like insects and crustaceans. The creature's scientific name is Stanleycaris hairpex, and it had 2 dangling eyes on stalks with 1 gigantic eye in the middle. It also had spiked claws and lived during the Cambrian period, which was when life exploded in a serious way on the planet for the first time. Even though it was only a prawn, it was the apex predator of its time. The fossil was found in the Canadian Rocky Mountains in a prehistoric graveyard called Burgess Shale. University of Toronto scientist Joseph Moisiuk says he and his team have been able to look at the visual processing centers of the creature's eyes and even see the traces of nerves going into its appendages. It truly was a disturbing life form, and yet it's only one example of what the oceans looked like approximately 506 million years ago. It was a primordial soup of insectoid-like monsters just like this one, all birthed from some cosmic nightmare. Thanks for watching! Remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye!